Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
Thanksgiving always felt like a performance, not a holiday, especially in our house, where the table was set with both porcelain and hidden contempt. You'd think that after almost 4 decades of being in this family, I'd have learned how to coat my armor with cranberry sauce and pretend everything tasted fine. But no. No matter how many years passed, I still caught myself holding my breath before I walked through that familiar front door. My parents still lived in the same beige-bricked colonial they'd bought in the early 80s, the same one where I shared a hallway with my older brother Eric, who had a knack for weaponizing silence or, worse, pretending you didn't exist. I parked across the street like I always did, so I'd have an excuse to leave whenever I wanted, and sat there with the engine running a full minute longer than necessary. The windows had started fogging from the inside. I wiped a circle clear with my palm and stared at my own reflection until my jaw clenched. I wasn't here for a fight. I was here because tradition demanded it, like clocking in at a job you hate but won't quit because your name's still on the payroll. Inside, everything looked almost unchanged. Same turkey-shaped candle centerpiece. Same pumpkin-printed paper napkins that never matched the fancy dishes. And same awkward energy simmering under small talk like gravy that was about to curdle. My mom air-kissed me like I was already wearing makeup she didn't like, and my dad gave me his usual one-armed side hug, already holding a tumbler of scotch, even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. Eric was there, of course, already holding court near the kitchen like he always did. He looked exactly like the LinkedIn version of himself, collar too stiff, hair slicked back like he didn't trust it to have a personality. He spotted me before I spotted him, and I swear he smirked before calling out across the room, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey, look who finally decided to take a break from doodling logos and finger painting for a living." The room chuckled. God, that sound. That dull, forced laughter from relatives who'd been trained to find him charming. I swallowed the instinct to tell him where to stick his custom cufflinks and smiled instead, the kind of smile you give when you know you're going to win eventually. But not yet. Not today. Let the man gloat. "Hi, Eric," I said, moving past him like he was furniture I didn't like the placement of. I hugged Aunt Marilyn next. She was the only one whose eyes didn't look glazed over from pre-meal wine or pre-packaged affection. She looked at me longer than necessary, like she already knew something no one else did. I should have been suspicious. Dinner was a slow roast of the same old beets. My mom complained about the cost of sweet potatoes, my dad brought up gas prices like he was running for something, and Eric started in on his usual speech about real work, and how millennials needed to stop pretending that making content was the same thing as contributing to the GDP. My cousin Rachel rolled her eyes, but said nothing. I noticed her sliding her phone under the table to probably text someone, "Kill me," with a string of turkey emojis. Then came the moment, every Thanksgiving had one, when Eric zeroed in on me like a hawk who spotted a mouse with a slightly nicer purse. "So, Jenna, still doing the whole branding thing? Or did you finally give in and get a real job?" I put down my fork slowly, not looking up yet. My mouth was full, which gave me a few precious seconds. I chewed, swallowed, took a sip of wine. I run my own creative agency, Eric. We work with tech startups, healthcare, retail, pretty much anyone who doesn't want to look like they're stuck in 1997. He scoffed, like I'd told him I sold glitter glue door to door. Right. So you're in marketing. Buzzwords and photoshopping stock images. My parents laughed lightly. Not because they thought it was funny. Just because it was easier than disagreeing with him. That's when Aunt Marilyn, God bless her, decided she'd had enough of his smugness. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look at him. She just dabbed at her mouth with a napkin, looked at her plate, and said, "Casual as hell. Funny. Didn't Jenna's agency just acquire your firm last week?" You could have heard a pin drop. Eric choked on his wine, literally. He coughed once, then again, harder, and had to grab his glass of water. My dad said something like, "You okay there, son?" but his voice was thinner than usual. I leaned back, wine glass in hand, still smiling. But now there was a different kind of energy around the table. Something charged. Aunt Marilyn just looked at me, shrugged, and popped a green bean in her mouth like she hadn't just dropped a nuclear warhead into the mashed potatoes. Eric, red-faced and blinking, managed to squeak out, "That's not accurate." "Oh," Marilyn said, innocent as a nun. Maybe I misunderstood. But I thought the press release said her agency just bought Taylor Concepts. "That's yours, right?" Silence. I gently turned my head toward Eric, tilted my glass, and said with a sugar-sweet tone, "It's been a hectic quarter. So many NDAs floating around, I forget who knows what." My mom finally found her voice. "Wait, what's happening?" But I didn't answer. I just kept eating my dinner, like this wasn't the exact moment I'd rehearsed in my head every night for the past 6 months. Because here's the thing. They thought I smiled because I was weak, or polite, or just raised to keep the peace. But the truth is, I smiled because I already won. I was 7 the first time I realized that in our family, winning wasn't about being the best, it was about being the loudest. Eric figured that out early. He was loud in every room, every sport, every argument. I, on the other hand, was quiet, observant. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I was taught that speaking up meant inviting comparison. And I already knew how that story ended. Every teacher, every neighbor, every holiday, Eric was the golden boy. He got straight A's in math, captained the debate team, and once fixed the family desktop computer by reinstalling Windows and somehow became a legend in the house for it. I remember sitting at the dinner table while he explained RAM to my parents like he was decoding alien technology, and they looked at him like he'd just unlocked a new level of genius. Meanwhile, I was drawing tiny comic panels on my napkin, and my mom leaned in and whispered, "Sweetheart, maybe don't waste the good ones." So I stopped using the good ones. In high school, Eric won awards. I designed the school's theater posters. He got a scholarship to business school. I took night classes in visual storytelling while working the front desk of a dentist's office. My dad once asked if I could turn the art thing into something you do on the side, like it was a quirky side hustle instead of the oxygen I needed to breathe. Eric never missed a chance to reinforce the idea that I was playing house with a career. Every time I saw him, there was a jab, a joke, a smirk. Something like, "So, any real clients yet?" Or, "You should pitch one of your sketches to my marketing guy, he loves indie stuff." What no one seemed to realize was that while he was handing out business cards at cocktail parties, I was building. Slowly, yes. Quietly, sure. But with every freelance gig, every late-night pitch deck, every weekend spent researching user behavior and color psychology, I was stacking bricks on top of each other until I had something that could stand on its own. And when it finally did, when my little 2-person shop turned into a boutique agency with a growing reputation, I didn't run to show it off. I just kept going. It wasn't until 3 months ago that the irony walked through my front door and sat down on my coffee table with a bow on top. My business partner, Nate, dropped a folder in front of me during our Monday strategy meeting and said, "Take a look at this one. Could be a solid acquisition target. Struggling firm, weak leadership, but decent infrastructure. They've got 2 big clients under contract and 5 employees we'd actually want to keep." I opened the folder. The agency's name, Taylor Concepts, was printed at the top. At first, I laughed. Out loud. Not because I thought it was funny, but because the universe had finally handed me something that didn't feel like a consolation prize. I sat there, flipping through numbers and org charts, realizing my brother had built a house of cards held together with buzzwords and borrowed prestige. The revenue stream was drying up, the talent was bleeding out, and he was still hosting networking mixers like he was Forbes' next cover story. "Are you okay?" Nate asked. I must have gone pale. I nodded too fast. "Yeah, just coincidence." But it wasn't. Not really. Not when you'd spent your whole life being told you were the weird one, the soft one, the one wasting your time on creative fluff. Not when you'd been humiliated in slow motion for 20 years and finally had the chance to draw a line under all of it. We moved forward. Carefully, discreetly. My name never showed up on the deal. I used one of our holding LLCs and let Nate do the calls. Due diligence was clean, smoother than I expected. Eric didn't even realize what was happening. He probably thought it was just another business thing, another startup looking for a quick boost. I kept showing up to Sunday dinners, smiling politely while he lectured my parents about interest rates and market trends, never suspecting that his entire platform was sinking under him. The night before Thanksgiving, I signed the final contract. My agency had officially acquired Taylor Concepts. The ink was still drying when I packed my suitcase for the trip home. I knew what I was walking into. Same table, same turkey, same smirks. But this time, the smile I wore was different. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't polite. It was loaded, like a gun with the safety off, waiting for the moment someone pulled the wrong thread. And then came Aunt Marilyn, with her perfect timing and razor-blade tongue, dropping the line I'd been too cautious to say out loud myself. Isn't it funny her agency just bought yours? It wasn't funny. It was ing poetic. Eric's jaw dropped like someone had unhooked it, and he choked so hard I thought my mom was going to do the Heimlich right there next to the sweet potatoes. I didn't even flinch. I just sipped my wine, let the silence stretch out and let them all sit with it. Let them sit with me. Because I wasn't the soft one anymore. I was the one holding the deed. Eric's face twisted in real time, a strange mix of denial, confusion, and panic that spread across his features like a slow chemical reaction. The way he looked at Aunt Marilyn like she'd just read his bank statement aloud in church was so satisfying, I could almost taste it, sweeter than the candied yams I didn't bother eating. His hand tightened around his wine glass, his knuckles turning white, and for a second I wondered if he was going to throw it across the room or just melt into the floor entirely. He coughed again, trying to clear the tension from his throat, but it clung to him like the wine he'd just choked on. That's not accurate, he said, his voice too high, too brittle, like a mirror already cracked in 5 places. Aunt Marilyn didn't even blink. She just reached for her water and gave a little shrug, as if she'd merely asked whether the stuffing had sage in it. Well, she said slowly, I guess I must have misread the press release. It's hard to keep track, especially when everything starts with Taylor's this and Concepts that. My father looked up from his plate like he'd just realized he was a background character in a drama he thought was a comedy. What's going on? He asked, tone flat, the way he used to ask about weird charges on the credit card bill. Eric turned to me then, like I held the script he'd forgotten to memorize. You're not serious, he said, voice lower now, quieter but shaking beneath the surface, like an engine on the verge of seizing up. That's not even finalized. We're still in negotiations. I didn't raise my voice, didn't gloat, didn't even blink. I just reached into my purse, pulled out the folder I'd tucked there earlier like a magician preparing for the final reveal, and laid it on the table like it was the most casual thing in the world. Cream-colored cardstock, gold-embossed company name, and the thick weight of completed paperwork that smelled like victory and legal ink. Oh, it's finalized, I said, flipping it open to the signature page with slow, deliberate fingers. Signed, sealed, and not quite delivered yet, but close enough for dinner conversation. His eyes scanned the page like he could will it to disappear by sheer force of denial, but the names were all there, mine, Nate's, the holding company, the dissolving of his executive role, the reorganization of departments. Every dotted line had been crossed with the kind of precision I used to envy in his old math homework. That's impossible, he said, softer now, to no one in particular. That's embarrassing. Aunt Marilyn offered, like she was topping off her tea. Well, yes, but not impossible. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, which I knew my mother hated, and tilted my head just enough to twist the knife without saying a single cruel word. We saw potential in your infrastructure, I said. There are a few departments we'll keep. A couple team members, too. The rest, well, we've already begun restructuring. It was at this exact moment, about 3 minutes into the conversation, that I made a little mistake on purpose, mind you, but one that I knew someone would catch. I mean, when 90% of 30 is like 22, you know it's not sustainable. There was a pause, then Rachel, my cousin across the table, blinked twice. Wait, 90% of 30 is 27? Close enough, I said with a shrug and a smirk, watching her eyebrows pinch together as she reached for her phone, probably already itching to correct me in a group chat. Eric hadn't moved. Not really. He was blinking a lot, like someone just woke him from a long, stupid dream where he was still in control of something that had already left the building. My mom looked like she didn't know whose side to be on, which, honestly, was par for the course. That's not how business works, Eric finally muttered, a little louder now, trying to scrape together what was left of his ego. You don't just swoop in and buy someone's company out of spite. I tilted my head, took another sip of wine, and let the pause settle. Of course not, I said. You buy it because it's a good strategic move. The spite is just a fringe benefit. He stood up so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood. Everyone at the table flinched except me. You're unbelievable, he snapped. This is disgusting. I've put my life into that company. And now it's part of mine, I replied, my tone light, almost breezy, like we were talking about passing the salt instead of dismantling his professional identity. He looked around the table, waiting for anyone, to back him up. But the silence that followed was thicker than gravy and 3 times stickier. No one moved. Aunt Marilyn, in her infinite timing, leaned in once more and delivered the final blow. She didn't just buy your firm, sweetheart, she said with a smile so sweet it gave me chills. She bought your people. Eric froze. His eyes flicked to me, and for a second, I saw something I'd never seen in them before, not just shock, not even just humiliation, but fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize the person you've been underestimating for years just took the one thing you cared about and turned it into leverage. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. Because in that room, at that table, under the glow of flickering candlelight and the smell of roasted turkey and betrayal, I finally understood something deep in my bones. Revenge isn't about shouting louder. It's about being the one who's still smiling after everyone else goes quiet. My dad used to say I was too sensitive, like it was a defect I needed to grow out of before the world handed me real responsibilities. I remember the exact phrasing, too. You can't take everything so personally, Jenna. Business doesn't care about your feelings. I was probably 15 the first time he said it, after I cried because Eric had mocked the comic I drew for the school newspaper. Dad had barely looked up from his Wall Street Journal, just shook his head and told me to toughen up. Meanwhile, Eric was praised for having a sharp sense of humor and good instincts. That phrase, good instincts, was repeated like a prayer in our house, a golden thread stitched through every anecdote about him, as if one day he'd single-handedly turn the family name into a brand. Funny how things turn out when no one's watching. After Thanksgiving last year, I started hearing things subtle, quiet rumors that would have floated right past anyone else's radar. A former classmate messaged me on LinkedIn about looking for freelance work after leaving Taylor Concepts. Said something about low morale and leadership being distracted. I didn't bite then. But I filed it away in the drawer I kept for moments like that, odd little details that didn't seem relevant yet, but would eventually come together like puzzle pieces if you waited long enough. By early spring, 2 more people I knew mentioned Eric's company in passing. One said they lost a pitch to a newer agency with stronger creative. Another said Eric had dropped out of a local panel discussion without explanation. That was the first real flag. Eric loved being seen, especially when he could stand in front of a microphone and talk about scaling vertically or leveraging brand equity, like he'd invented capitalism in a WeWork bathroom. So I started digging, not obsessively, not recklessly, just with quiet, deliberate steps. I asked Nate to look into their books. Nate, my co-founder and the man who sees 5 moves ahead of most people, raised one eyebrow and said, "You sure this isn't about ego?" I didn't answer him then. Mostly because I didn't know yet. Taylor Concepts was bleeding. Not bleeding out, not crashing into the ground at full speed, but slowly, methodically, like a faucet that wouldn't stop dripping. They'd lost 2 retainer clients over the winter. Their top creative director left for a competitor. Their junior team was freelancing on the side to pay rent. But the worst part, the truly fatal flaw, was Eric. He hadn't evolved. He was still pitching like it was 2009, still designing decks in Arial, still using words like synergy and thinking they meant something. I saw the weak points immediately. And so did Nate. We spent 2 months gathering everything. I kept my name off every email, used our holding company, made sure the acquisition came through the side door, not the front. When we submitted the initial letter of interest, Eric didn't even notice me in the fine print. I wasn't there for the calls, and I wasn't listed on the summary documents. We masked the structure intentionally, wrapped it in generic legalese and corporate language so dense it could choke a room full of lawyers. There's something chillingly satisfying about dismantling a person's pride without ever touching them directly. I didn't have to lie, didn't have to twist anything, I just waited for the numbers to tell the story. And they did. Oh, they did. His accounts were stretched thin, his credit lines strained, and his overhead absurd for a firm his size. Taylor Concepts was posturing, and the bones beneath the suit were cracking. When we submitted the formal acquisition paperwork, their board signed it within 2 weeks. No counteroffer. No hesitation. Eric had no idea until it was done, and even then, he probably didn't read past the first 3 paragraphs. That was his fatal weakness. He never believed he could be outplayed by someone who once drew cartoons on napkins. Nate, of course, kept a level head the entire time. "We're not doing this just to make a point," he reminded me during every call. "If this becomes personal, it gets messy." But I stayed focused, stayed strategic, because I knew something he didn't. It had always been personal. For Eric. For my dad. For everyone who ever dismissed me like a feather that couldn't possibly weigh anything. I signed the final paperwork 2 nights before Thanksgiving. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it or even tell my mother. I just made a cup of tea and sat on my balcony in silence, listening to the quiet wind that finally sounded like victory. Which brings us back to the driveway, hours after the turkey had been cleared and the wine had gone warm in our glasses. Most of the family had trickled out by then, fading into the shadows with uncomfortable glances and flimsy excuses about early mornings. The tension had settled, but not for Eric. He waited by my car like a teenager outside detention, arms crossed, face flushed, eyes burning with confusion he couldn't fully hide. "You seriously did this to me?" he asked, his voice low but shaking. "Why the hell would you do this to me?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man who used to yank the remote out of my hands, who called my dreams cute, who never once asked how my business was doing, but always had advice on how I should do it better. And I said what I'd been waiting to say since the day he first called my career a phase. "Because you taught me how." I didn't sleep the night after Thanksgiving, not a wink, not a minute, not even the fake kind of sleep you try to trick yourself into with soft music or melatonin and heavy blankets. I just laid there in the quiet hum of my condo, staring at the ceiling like it held answers it had been hiding from me all these years. My living room still smelled faintly of cinnamon and dry pine from the early wreath I'd hung on the door, the kind of thing I never used to bother with but started doing this year, maybe as some silent, personal declaration that I was allowed to take up space now. That I could make things nice, even for myself. I sat up around 4 in the morning and replayed the entire dinner in my mind like a film I hadn't directed but deeply enjoyed watching. The awkward laughter, the wine-soaked silence, the way Eric's smirk crumbled under the weight of the truth, it all unspooled in my head like a private reel, one I knew I'd revisit on quieter days when doubt crept in again, as it always did. But I kept coming back to that final moment, That question he threw at me in the driveway like it was supposed to hurt. Why would I do this to him? The real question was, why did he think I wouldn't? I never wanted revenge. Not at first. That's the part people probably won't believe, especially if they only catch the end of the story, the part where the underdog rises up and takes the throne, but the truth is messier than that. I didn't grow up dreaming about revenge. I grew up dreaming about being seen, about being taken seriously. I wanted a seat at the table, not the head of it. I didn't want to crush him. I just wanted him to stop stepping on me like I was a floor tile in the hallway of his life. But Eric never left it alone. Never missed a moment to belittle what I loved, to shrink what I'd built into something small and decorative. At every family gathering, every wedding, every casual Sunday brunch where I dared to mention a new client or project, he'd roll his eyes and pivot the conversation to his numbers, his titles, his connections. Even when I started to succeed, when the agency actually began making real money, he acted like it was some fluke or a temporary phase, like my teen obsession with theater or that time I tried going vegan for a month. And slowly, over time, something shifted. I stopped wanting his approval and started wanting distance. And when distance wasn't enough, when he kept showing up in my life like an uninvited ad pop-up, I decided I'd do what I did best. I'd make it look effortless. We didn't destroy his company. We absorbed it. Quietly, elegantly, with surgical precision. We kept 4 of his top people, 2 of whom had been looking for a way out for months, and let the rest go with generous severance packages and polite language about restructuring. We didn't torch the place. We redesigned it. From the inside out. Nate handled the transition meetings. I didn't even show up to the office until the first round of onboarding had been completed. When I did walk in finally, weeks later, I didn't make an announcement. I just sat down in the corner glass office and started reviewing strategy documents like it was any other Monday. Eric, of course, was already gone by then. I didn't fire him immediately, though I could have. I waited until the papers were dry, the staff had been briefed, and the lawyers had double-checked every clause. I sent him a termination letter by courier, professionally worded, no personal commentary, just the facts. I never even signed it myself. Nate did. We made it clean, efficient, and absolutely untraceable to any emotional motive. But make no mistake, it was personal. Not because I hate him, and not because I wanted to hurt him, but because for so long, he genuinely believed I would keep taking it. That I would always stay small, always play polite, always sit in the shadow he insisted was shade when it was really just control. He counted on my silence. He mistook my restraint for weakness. And when the day came that I took back my dignity, not in words, not in argument, but in paperwork and strategy and capital, he didn't know what to do with it. He called me 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail. His voice cracked somewhere in the middle, right between we could have worked together, and this was over the line. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because the truth was, I had nothing left to explain. I didn't owe him an apology for playing the game by his rules better than he ever expected. And if I'm being honest, that's what really burned him. Not the buyout, not the restructuring, but the fact that he thought he was the only one allowed to make power moves and walk away clean. That I wouldn't dare. Well, I did dare. I dared quietly, strategically, with a smile he never saw coming. And even now, sitting in my living room with the fireplace flickering and the world back to its ordinary rhythm, I'm not dancing on his downfall. I'm just finally standing on even ground. I didn't want to win. I just didn't want to lose anymore.